So I wanted to make a short video talking about a little bit about bivariate analysis, which is the topic that is covered by modules 4 and 5. And my thought was the best way to go through the process of how you would go from start to finish in terms of deciding what test to use, actually using that test, and then putting the results into a Word document so you can turn in your assignment. I would start with, to illustrate all of those steps, I'm going to be using the sample response problem that is posted in Module 5. And this sample response problem is there because it goes through each of those steps. So it's not a part of your assignment, but to give you an illustration on how a typical problem on your assignment, whether it's the discussion board or the written assignment, how a typical problem would be solved. And so for this particular sample problem, what I'm trying to do is to see if there's a relationship between race and nicotine dependence. And the two variables that I want to use for that, in the data set, there's actually a second race ethnicity variable that's called white, which takes a value of 1 if the respondent was white, and then 0 if they were some other nationality or ethnicity, other race or ethnicity. So there's that variable, and then also the Fagerstrom nicotine dependence scale. And so those are the two variables. I want to see if there's a relationship between them. Now, since we haven't used that race binary indicator yet, what I would do then, or for any variable that you're not familiar with what it looks like, is to go to the list of variables. This is in the folder that has the actual data set for the class in it, the Quit and Win data set. And if you haven't done this already, what I've suggested to several students that I think will be helpful throughout the course is to print this out or have it someplace where you can pull it up and to actually write on this or type on this what type of variable each of these is. So we talked in the earlier module, in Module 3, about the level of measurement. And so I would actually write this on here so that you are clear going forward what type of variable each of these are. So for example, just as a reminder, the treatment variable takes a value of 1 for treatment and 0 for control. That would be a nominal variable. So that meets the definition for nominal variable. But for the two that we're looking for at this assignment, the Fagerstrom nicotine dependence scale or nicotine tolerance scale, it looks at, it has a range of 0 to 10, and it has to do with how quickly you would need to get to be able to smoke depending on different situations. And with 0 being the least dependent and 10 being the most dependent, because it's a sum of 10 items, we tend to treat this as a continuous variable for the purpose of analysis. So just keeping in mind, Fagerstrom gets treated as a continuous variable, and the other one that we're looking at here would be the variable white is a little farther down. It's on page 3. It takes a value of 0 for African American, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, and other, and then 1 for white. So again, it's a 2-category variable, which makes it nominal. So we have a nominal variable and a continuous variable. And some of you may be thinking, I already know the answer to that, but I'm going to show you where you can look to check. And so in, I believe it's in Module 2, there is a document that's called Overview of Variable Types and Univariate and Bivariate Analysis. And so this gives you a little reminder at the beginning of what the variable types are. So you've probably already looked at this document. So it gives you an idea of what the variable types are, but what will be key for this assignment is to skip through and wait and see when you get to the bivariate part, which kind of gives you sort of a flow chart for how you get from understanding what the level of measurement is to then being able to decide what type of test to use. So remember we had a nominal variable with 2 categories, and a continuous variable. So I'm gonna flip through here, or just skim through here and find out. So example D says, for a continuous variable and a nominal one, a 2-sample t-test if the nominal variable has 2 categories. That's exactly what we have. So we have the continuous variable that is Fagerstrom nicotine dependence, and then we have a nominal variable with 2 categories, which is the race variable with white versus other. So we're using a 2-sample t-test. Great. So that's easily half the battle. Yeah. So now what I've done here is I have the data set. This is the data set you've probably are familiar with, having seen this by this point. Yeah. So this is the data set. So if you can see, so here's Fagerstrom in row 8, and then the white variable is in row 19. So what I want to do is go to Analyze, and this is going to be a comparison of means. And this will all be in the survival guide, you know, how you do this, but I'm just going to go through this example. This is an independent samples t-test. I call it a 2-sample t-test. Those two things are interchangeable. An independent sample t-test or a 2-sample t-test, they both mean that each observation in the data set belongs to exactly one of the 2 groups that you're comparing. They can only be in one or the other. In this case, they can only be, their race can either be white or other. So they're just in one of those 2 groups. So I'm going to choose this. And then there are 2 variables that you need to fill in. One is the test variable, which is the variable that's being compared. And then the grouping variable, which is the variable that's used to define which observations belong in each of the 2 groups. So the test variable for us is going to be the Fagerstrom. So I'm just going to click and move it over. And then the grouping variable is, it's hard to see because, let's see. Nope, that's not it. Yeah, this one. So make sure you put the right grouping variable in there. If you put race in there, it's going to give you an error because it's going to say that you have too many categories to do a t-test, because with more than 2, you are not able to use an independent samples t-test. And then you need to do this next step, which is to define the groups. This is coded as 1 for white and 0 for other. It doesn't matter which of those 2 numbers you put in the group 1 and group 2 box. You could do it either way. And then continue and say OK. All right, so here we have it. And I'm just going to go through this whole thing. So this is the output, and we have there, as you might recall from having looked at the module 5 document, there are actually 2 versions of the t-test. One assumes that the variances are equal, and one is for if the variances are not equal. And it's kind of like a 2-step process to run this test. The first is to decide which of these 2 rows fits for this particular example. And the way we decide that is by looking at the Levine's test for equality of variances. So the way that Levine's test works is you look at, this is the F statistic for the Levine's test, and this is the significance level. So since this is far greater than 0.05, we would not reject the null hypothesis. We would conclude, since this is a test of equality of variances, we would conclude that the variances are equal. So we would look at this row, equal variances assumed. Now we can go over and look at these columns that have to do with the actual t-test for the equality of means. And remember, we're on the top line here. So this is the t value for the comparison, 2.4, and this is the p value, 0.017. And since this is less than 0.05, our conclusion would be that there's a significant difference in nicotine dependence between white respondents and those who are of other racial or ethnic backgrounds. There are 540 white participants and 67 in the other group. the mean nicotine dependence was 4.7 for the white respondents and 4.1 for the other group. So the conclusion would be, based on this, that white participants had significantly higher nicotine dependence compared to those of other racial backgrounds. Someone asked me a question about how to, I'm going to open this so it's a little easier to see, how to save this in a Word document without having the format get messed up. So I'm going to just open a new Word document. For things like this, I like to change my page layout. You don't have to do this. And there are ways to resize it resize the output also. But my sort of lazy way is to change the orientation to landscape. So instead of having tall and narrow, I have short and wide. And then when I go back to the SPSS, I can choose this whole t-test part just by clicking on this little folder icon. And I'm using a PC, so Mac will be a little bit different. But if I do a right click, then I can choose copy special and say okay. Yeah. And then when I paste it here, I get this. And so when you're actually submitting it, this fits on the page actually, so everything is fine. If you don't think that you don't remember to, and you can get rid of this if you want to, although you don't have to. So I just highlighted this and then cut it. You can get rid of that if you want. Just a little cleanup thing. You don't have to. I'm not going to take off for that. If it makes it easier for you to look at this. So everything here fits on one page. If for some reason something's cut off on the right hand side because of your margins or your orientation or something like that, it doesn't matter, because the key thing that we need really is this. And I guess also this, because this is what told us, because this was greater than 0.05, this told us that we should use equal variance as assumed, which is this top line. And so once you can see that, and the other part that you need to be able to see would be what the two means are, so that when you give your interpretation, it's not just you saying, oh, since this p-value was 0.017, that means the groups are different from each other. But you can further say, because I know that the mean for the white, the group of white participants is greater than the mean for those who were of other racial or ethnic backgrounds, my conclusion, therefore, my real-world conclusion would be that those participants with those participants who are white, on average, were more nicotine dependent than those who were not. And so I think I've covered, given you an overview of where to look for various things. So all of those documents that I refer to are all in the folders for modules either 2, 3, 4, or 5. And if you have trouble finding them, you can let me know. If there are other things that I need to be putting in a video, you can let me know that as well. I actually appreciate getting the feedback in terms of what parts need to be explained further. Obviously, I've just gone through one type of analysis strategy, but the other ones will follow directly from that once you look at this key document, which is the overview of variable types and univariate bivariate analysis, with the focus for modules 4 and 5 being on this part that, starting in the middle of, I think, page 2, which talks about bivariate statistics. And that's what I have for this. So if there are other things that come up with this, then please let me know, and I can add more detail.